Dr. Piri, hi.
Hi, Gordon. We're just waiting for others to join, then we'll start.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So we're going to start in the next 3 minutes.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, so maybe at 55 you can just speak a bit about outro, maybe 3 minutes, and then we start the webinar. So, yeah. No, no, no. Just prioritize more more about research consultants. And just say that there's opportunity platform for linking on quite start. Don't speak more about anything. Just say, watch out on the first next month is going to be launched. That's it. Because we don't want you to open up for questions. Just speak and then you allow the presentation to start. And please, you should be letting people in. I can't multitask, huh?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Well, my name is Blessings. I am an economist. I have been given the privilege by Dr. Joseph to present something just in under 5 minutes. So, a little bit about the IRIL, which is Alexander Institute of Learning, Research.
Uh, sorry for jumping in. Are you able to record the session from your end?
Okay, Gordon, yes. You can go ahead, Blessing, so that we start.
Okay, so a little bit about IRIL, which is Alexander Institute of Learning, Research and Innovation. It specializes in education, research, and consultancy. IRIL was created to bridge the gap in research services, learning, accessible learning, especially in a fast digital area and environment like Zambia. One of the products of IREL is Tipunzile, which is a online tutoring platform. It's going to be both website based and also going to be mobile apps, both for Android and iOS, which is Apple. It's going to be launched by the end of the month, and currently we are enrolling for tutors. Those who are interested, we were going to present a link by the end of the session. Though the launch is scheduled at the end of the month, you can still pre-register as a tutor. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Gordon, I'm not sure if the webinar option allows to record. It's not, but I'm sure you'll be able to access the recording and we'll be able to discuss how. So I think now we'll go straight because it's only set for 1 hour. So
Okay, thanks.
perhaps I can just go ahead and present. So just a moment, let me share the slides. Yeah, so I'll start ahead with the presentation. So due to the fact that it's just an hour, my suggestion is that maybe I can allow questions at the end or maybe after some first sessions, then I can open up for questions so that we can try to finish the content sent for today and then we can proceed to tomorrow with the last half of the session so that at least we can cover much ground within the 2 hours that has been projected. So I'll be stopping for a few moments to allow people in, but we're going to proceed now with the webinar. So let me just share screen. I hope you can see my screen. Yeah. So we're going to learn about mastering the art of scientific writing. And of course, my name is Joseph Piri, and I'll speak a bit more about myself. But basically, from a nutshell, I'm a researcher, an academician, an academic editor, a consultant, and a lecturer. And I'll speak more about what I do in a subsequent slide. So maybe I can cover a little about the purpose of the webinar. So basically, this webinar is set up to enhance capacity in the space of academic writing and also perhaps to further collaboration and network among scholars, think tanks, and academicians as well as students around the world. The idea behind this is that a good number of us, when we're at university, especially at graduate level, at doctorate level, we are required to do some form of scientific writing, and perhaps some of us work in the scientific space where we always do research. But I think that art, in terms of how to go about to do research, the types of research, and maybe how to look for credible platforms where you can disseminate your findings, I think that's basically the purpose and the motivation behind this webinar. So I'll just pause this slide maybe for a moment so that maybe one or two persons who might not know me can just see a bit about myself with regards to my education, my affiliations, research interest, academic ranking, hobbies, maybe a bit more about one detail about my personal life, so that you can perhaps know who the person is behind this webinar we have on mastering the art of scientific writing. Yeah, so I'm a development economics by profession, and my highest qualification, of course, is a PhD in economics and management in the field of sector economics and economics of enterprise. I work at the Zambia Institute of Policy Analysis and Research as a research fellow heading the macroeconomics unit. I'm an academic editor in Plus One and also Sustainability Journal, and also a nominated editor for a book series in Tara and Francis on development economics, which we'll talk more about tomorrow when we talk about publishing platforms. And then, of course, I love to research around areas to do with environment, energy, African economies, and I like applied econometrics in nature. And of course, I'm a Man U fan, and we are playing tomorrow. Yeah. So, in terms of what we hope to achieve over the next 2 days, I think today we just basically look at the motivation and the importance of academic writing, types of research, then we look at identifying research gaps and topic formulation, and then of course we look at the role of literature in research, and then we'll touch a bit on the inductive versus deductive approach, which will be precursor to the methodology which we are going to look at tomorrow. And then of course we'll look at developing a conceptual framework, and then we'll discuss the role of AI in scientific research. And then tomorrow we'll look at developing a methodology for a research, and then we'll discuss finding research findings, that's presentations and interpretation. And then we're going to look at the IMRAD style of writing, which is introduction, methods, results, and discussions. So look at the style, techniques, and strategies that you can institute when you use that style in the space of scientific writing. And then, of course, we'll look at referencing in terms of styles, strategies, and how you can use AI as well as software to enhance your referencing style. And then, of course, we'll look at publication platforms and opportunities, and then we'll sum up the 2 days. So maybe one asks yourself, maybe why do research? What is the thinking behind research? So I'm not able to look at all the screens, but maybe I can allow just one comment. If anyone can just speak out and give their thoughts on why we do research, besides what's shared on the slide. Anyone with a thought? Yes, you can go ahead.
Thank you very much, Doc. So my understanding about research is that one can find a problem in society, and in seeking to provide solution to that, then you can go about research in order for you to counter to the problems in society.
Yes, very much correct, right? Sometimes we look at a problem that we want to address, and then we think about solutions and alternatives to that problem. For example, about 2 years ago, we all had the COVID crisis, and everybody was in panic mode to find the solution. So that's enhanced research in this field of medical space. I think some people are not muted. Guys, just mute yourself because it's distracting others. And then, of course, even in the space of energy now, with the climatic change, the load shedding, everybody's thinking about alternative means of fuel, alternative means of energy. So all those are issues. Even in the space of economics, we ask ourselves to say, we're impacted by the price volatilities. The copper product is not as prominent as it should have been. So how then can we look at alternative into how we can enhance economic productivity? So all those are issues you can ask yourself. So based on what I have here, the first issue, of course, is research helps to expand knowledge and to drive innovation. And there's always that aspect about the novelty or new ideas that we are bringing to the table. And then, of course, it's essential for academic progress, industry application, and policy making. For example, if you're in university, you want to graduate, that's the first step because that needs to show that you deserve the graduation. And then, of course, application in terms of how do we apply our knowledge in order to enhance the growth of the nation and all. And of course, for policy making, like many of us in our space, we use research to recommend some policy diagnosis. So all that is through research. And then what does it do? It helps solve real world problems and helps decision making. We mentioned the idea of COVID, we've mentioned the issue of global warming and all, so it also helps address that. But one then asks, how does it help improve decision making? The first question then you ask yourself is the issue of using data to enhance decision making. So it helps in the sense that we don't want a situation, for example, in government where we have textbook economists or textbook policymakers. So research provides you the tools, the instruments that addresses the problem, and then based on the problem, it could also provide diagnosis, and that helps to enhance decision making. Even at a corporate level, if you are a CEO or a CFO, you need some business analyst to tell you to say this model is profitable. If you invest in advertising, this is how much your profit could grow. If you invest in training, in skills development, all those are as a result of research. And then, of course, from a much broader perspective, it leads to new theories, technology, and practical solutions. So, all those are pointers that one speaks to when it comes to why we do research, the motivations of research, and most importantly, the importance of research. And then one would ask, what is the purpose of research in academia, in industry, and in policy? So in academia, of course, where many of us have been, it advances knowledge, it advances theory, it supports teaching and contributes to knowledge. So one would ask, then how does research support teaching? I think that's where it comes in, where we, the lecturers, the academicians, have to be up to date with the current happenings. So if you look at the industry space, for example, in accounts, in business, what softwares are they using? Maybe to develop balance sheets, income statements, cash flow. About 20 years ago, everybody would rely on Excel. And then a few years ago, we would use Pastel. Now we have softwares like SAP, and then we have so many softwares that are used. So all those are the result of research, and then they make work easier, and you find that you can develop a cash flow and income statement and all within the click of a button. That is as a result of research. Another benefit that could come out in terms of research is the issue of efficiency. For example, if you look at our country, Zambia, let's take, for example, the Ministry of Lands. Over the years, people would spend a lot of time processing titles, pushing document after document. But now we have an electronic system where you can process document within the click of a button. So that promotes about efficiency, and actually that could contribute to productivity because it cuts down red tape, it cuts down on bureaucracy, and that makes work easier, and it also promotes issues to do with accountability. And then, of course, from a policy standpoint, it informs decision making. So I'm sure you've noticed that every year by September, October, the Ministry of Finance will, for example, present the national budget. So that comes out as a result of research where we're able to see how is our economy doing, how is our GDP doing, how is our inflation rate. All those figures would help the government to first know the status quo, forecast and plan against the dynamics at OGA, and that helps in ensuring that decisions are made promptly and based on real life data. So research is not only there for you to get a degree, but it's actually there to better our lives, to make us efficient, productive, and most importantly, make good decisions which are essential for survival, whether at an individual level, at a business level, or at a national level. So all those are issues that one could think about with regards to what research entails, as well as its significance. Then one would ask, what are some of the benefits of doing good scientific research? I don't know, maybe if I can get just maybe 2 comments from anyone, just your thoughts about this. Anyone who wants to comment on the benefits of doing good scientific research?
I think it gives us an opportunity to test our theory with real life data, because as in you can have biases, assumptions, beliefs, and passed on knowledge which may not empirically be proven, or there could be some facts which could be true in a particular geographical location but may not necessarily represent the same underlying truth in a different geographical location. So with the scientific research, it gives us an opportunity to use data in that particular location and test theory or facts or hypothesis, so that at least we're able to come to the truth of things.
Exactly right, and it also helps us to avoid the demise of cherry picking. So maybe some of you might wonder, what does cherry picking entail? So for example, when you're picking cherry or maybe you're picking mulberry, there's that tendency to always pick the ripe ones and the good ones and leave out what's bad. That's the concept of bias, right, that we're trying to avoid. But when it comes to scientific research, it's about putting the pieces together, raw data, process it, and letting the decisions to be guided by data. That's very much essential in terms of planning. So it's, for example, you are running an organization, maybe you're CEO of MTN, and then one argues that maybe if we're going to train people on using softwares, they'll be more productive and will make more profit. The only way you can do that is by doing research. So maybe you can do what we call an RCT, which is a randomized control trial, where you can pick a sample of people, maybe 10 people, train them, and then observe their performance in the industry, and then you compare against people that were not trained. Of course, you'd be encouraged to ensure that they've got similar abilities, similar attributes, and similar characteristics. So research is the only basis that you can always validate a claim and ensure that you make decisions based on the findings that have been ascertained. So research is very much key in that space because it always prevents a bias, but most importantly, it contributes to the body of knowledge, it creates innovations, and most importantly, it helps us make optimal decisions that are data-based decisions. So this is very much important, and it applies across all industries. Even in the health sector, I think I noticed that a good people in the health industry enrolled for this training. So for example, you want to find out to say, maybe we've introduced a diagnosis, maybe a new treatment, maybe Moderna to fight against COVID. You want to find out to say, how long does the treatment last and how impactful is it as compared to someone who doesn't get it. So you probably carry out the treatment and then observe people and their responses over time, and then it is from that observation that you'll be able to make a decision on whether the plans to introduce a virus or a vaccine are effective or not. And all those are benefits that one could derive from research. It's the same with us in the field of economics. One would argue to say, is it a good decision for the government to borrow money? Is it sustainable or not? So just speaking from our opinion is not the best way to go about it. So you can look at countries that have borrowed and the decisions that have made upon borrowing that money, and then you compare. Or perhaps you can then do a bit of modeling. Of course, we'll not go into modeling in today's lesson, but this will just give you a premise to say whatever claim that you make must be empirically backed. Like for example, our lawyers, they always have a claim, the role of principle, which they say, he who claims shall prove. So it's the same aspect in terms of research. If you are trying to go against a decision or your objecting, it's always good to back your findings by some research that speaks to the reality, and that's one of the benefits that come out of doing research. So just to add to what Gordon said, in terms of the impact of good scientific research, one, it enhances clarity, credibility, and accessibility of research findings. It increases the chances of publishing in high impact journals, and we'll get to that tomorrow because there's a lot of predatory journals, and this is something you have to watch out for, especially if you're doing a PhD or a high level study. And then it facilitates knowledge transfer across disciplines and to the public. So good scientific research should be replicated. So if, for example, Jeff, you've done a research, and then the findings of that research should benefit everyone, and someone else who wants to do research after you should be able to borrow from your method, your approaches, and they should be able to do a similar research in a different geographic locations. And then of course it helps avoid misinterpretation and ensures accurate dissemination of information. I think this is very much key for many of us. We have to make sure that whatever we find is backed by research, and this is something that we have to be careful about because sometimes just presenting statistics in itself does not entail research, and that's where the aspect of validity is very much important when it comes to the aspect of good scientific writing. So of course, when you do research now, there are several platforms under which you can disseminate your information. So maybe I'll just share a few just for the benefit of those on this call, and then we build on into scientific writing in terms of writing an academic article, and then we'll build on with other series in our subsequent lectures. So the first one, of course, which is substandard for many of us, is a dissertation, right? Or a thesis. It's one and the same, right? Which is a long academic document submitted for a degree, master's, or a PhD. So it provides in-depth research, including literature review, methodology, and conclusions. And then, of course, it's normally stored in a university repositories, and of course, others would publish it, others would not. And then, of course, depending on the level, Some of the outputs from a dissertation are published. For example, my PhD dissertation was on the impact of agriculture on economic development in Zambia. And this is something that you can find on the repository of the Czech University of Life Sciences or an online platform. And there was a lot of output that came out of this dissertation, about 3 papers. So that's one way we can disseminate our research and our findings. And of course, if you remember when we were looking at the purpose of doing research, this one was for career progression and to obtain a qualification, but there is much more that we can do. The second level, of course, which is the most common for many of us in the body of knowledge, is a journal or a scientific paper, which is also called an academic paper. So this can be an article that's published and peer reviewed prior to publishing. There are so many platforms that people use to publish journals, and we'll talk about that. But the most common one is Google Scholar. So mostly if you go to Google Scholar, you'll be able to see some research depending on what you're looking for. Or you might find author-specific research if you are trying to find out research done by a specific individual. So there are several formats that we will look at, and in today's lecture, and mostly partially tomorrow, we're going to look at the IMRAD structure, which is a new word which is mostly applied in terms of doing research, which looks at the introduction, methods, results, and discussion. And of course, this is intended for an academic audience. So you find that someone who's in grade 12, maybe in grade 7, might not have the impetus to follow through an academic article, but someone from an academic institution, or someone working in a research institution, or someone who's working in a professional institution with specific interest in a specific subject is able to follow through a scientific article. And then we have a policy brief. So this is much targeted for policymakers when we do our research. So this is a situation where we summarize our findings or reports in a language that's easier and much easier for politicians to relate. I remember 3 weeks ago we did a study on the country economic transformation outlook, CITO, with ASSET, and we were able to produce a report about Zambia's country economic transformation outlook report as a study as well as a policy brief. So with a policy brief, you basically look at the objectives and mainly the policy implications of your findings, because the target are the policymakers. So for example, if you've done a research on the impact of raising the MPR and maybe selling out bonds on the interest rate, so your target in this case is Bank of Zambia. So you have to make sure that whatever you write is summarized in a policy brief where the decision makers or the board of the Bank of Zambia would be able to follow through and relate. And of course, you have to appreciate the audience you're dealing with. Of course, if you're writing with to Bank of Zambia, it's much easier because they're already economics and they're able to relate to the language. But if you are writing to maybe someone who's running the admin department of the specific ministry, you have to be sure that the language you communicate in is easier and understandable. But you have to make sure that it is still academic language, because we don't run away from the nature of our communique even as we write articles or as we do research. And then of course there are books. I think many of us have seen textbooks. So it's basically a comprehensive in-depth publication on a broader subject. So they will have examples, exercises, and more linked to the subject at interest. For example, our friends in finance, there was that book on financial accounting by Frankfurt, and there are books on economics, there are books on environment that we read when we are studying for undergraduate. So all those are some type of studies where you can disseminate information. And then we have a book chapter. So basically a book chapter is a section within an edited book. So the difference here is that a book is written by 2 or 3 authors or more, but a book chapter is edited by 2 or 3 editors or more, and then we have several authors that write respective chapters on a specific subject. So for example, a book chapter is more specialized than a full book because it looks at a broader audience and it looks at an audience with subject interest. For example, there was a book, Advances in African Economic, Social and Political Development, which was published in Springer. And then my colleague Socrates et al., they published a chapter on Kenya on inter-African trade in services and the African Continental Free Trade Area. So this can be a chapter that came out as a segment of a whole book that was edited by one or multiple editors. So that's one platform you can disseminate information. And then we have a monogram, which is a specialized book that focuses on a single subject or research topic. So this one goes deeper on a specific subject of interest. Are you looking at debt? Are you looking at energy? Are you looking at financial irregularities? So everything is linked to that specific subject and does not look at micro components of the subject from a broader perspective, like a textbook. So this is an example of a book. This was published on the World Bank website, Services Unbound, Digital Technologies and Policy Reforms in East Asia and the Pacific. So this is some of the book chapters, monograms, and all that you can see to understand the differences in terms of research output. And just a thought, maybe you can think about this under a minute. So I'll just pause these slides for a minute so that you can think about this even as we follow through this learning and much more. The findings of your project, prospective studies, and this will guide your potential research output and channel. So maybe think about it for a minute, and then I'm going to allow 2 comments and then we proceed. So from our colleagues who haven't commented, especially from our ladies, anybody who wants to respond to this thought so that we can build on that? Anybody? Let me just allow others in the webinar. Anybody wants to respond to this question? Or any questions? Okay, so let's proceed for now. So I think let's think about coming up with research topics so that we see if we can figure out a way that we can come up with comparative strategies. So the first point is you need to identify emerging trends and gaps in the literature, and then you need to focus on high impact policy relevant and industry driven questions, and then you need to engage with experts. Of course, if you have the opportunity, attend conferences and review funding opportunities. And then of course you need to consider interdisciplinary approaches for broader relevance. This will help you to come up with good research strategies, good topics in terms of how to find the literature gap, the methodological gap, even as you think about your potential research topic. So how then do you identify a research gap? So the first thing that you have to do is you have to conduct a thorough literature review to assess the existing knowledge, and we're going to try this today so that you can get a few techniques, right, and apply it tomorrow for potentially constructive manuscript. And then you need to identify contradiction, unanswered questions, and methodological weaknesses. I think Jeff and someone responded on why do you do research, and all those are questions that you have to ask even as you apply these strategies. And then you need to utilize systematic mapping, bibliometric analysis, and research databases. And I think we'll build more on this, especially tomorrow. And then of course you consult recent review papers, and of course you do a meta-analysis, which is a study where you look at a combination of studies and then you come up with general findings or general trends based on subject literature. So in terms of conducting a literature survey, how do you go about it? So of course you could establish the theoretical foundations of your study. This speaks more to maybe think about the theoretical framework like what Gordon mentioned, the theory behind. And then you need to help refine research questions, methodology, and most importantly, you need to prevent duplication of what has already been done, but you need to speak more about novelty, being original in your studies, bringing in new ideas, new perspectives, perhaps new knowledge as well, or data sets. So then how do you conduct a good literature review? Of course, you need to define your research objectives, and then you need to search for relevant literature in databases. This can be Scopus, Web of Science, Google Scholar, and the list is endless. And then of course you need to organize your findings using a reference management tool, and we're going to discuss this tomorrow. And then you need to critically analyze and synthesize the information, identify key themes and gaps. Just a moment, let me put this on the charger. part of the content that you need to consider when you're looking at the importance of conducting a thorough literature review. So let's look at these two topics. Just a moment. Let me just allow your colleagues in. It's a pity that a few people have joined us late. All right. So I would love to appreciate maybe 2 or 3 comments on the 2 questions on the board, on the slide, so that we can build up a literature survey based on what we've just shared. So the first comment is El Nino phenomena concerns exist on excessive environmental degradation culminating from agriculture, resource exploration, and energy production. Then the second one is macroeconomic indicators and government behaviors has had a bearing of development economies' debt stress levels. So when you have this as a statement, maybe this is just a problem that I've identified, or maybe just a thinking that I might have. Anybody who wants to comment, how would you go about researching, coming up with a research topic based on this? Anybody who wants to comment? Anybody wants to comment, colleagues?
So clarify.
I've presented those 2 slides to a potential problem that's affecting society. Let me just go back to the slides. And I'm thinking of coming up with a research topic for a manuscript, for a thesis, for a journal. How would you go about? You're given these 2 statements and you want to come up with a topic. The first one is El Nino phenomena concerns exist on excessive environmental degradation culminating from agriculture, resource exploration, and energy production. The second one is macroeconomic indicators and government behaviors has had a bearing of development economies, debt stress levels. Off your head, how would you come up with your topic based on this statement in terms of thinking about a literature review or potentially a research studies for a manuscript, a thesis, perhaps even a book? I just want your thoughts. I'll give you my own strategy that I've used to come up with articles, but I just want you to tell me your thoughts before we look at this in detail. Because I had these 2 indicators and I came up with 2 publications on these 2. On the second one, I think about 4 on the first one, but I just want to see how you would come about with a topic based on these statements. Any thought? Okay, so let me try to share my strategy, right? So which one should we work with? Should we work with the first one or the second one?
The first one.
Okay, so let's work with the first one, right? So I'll just try to share a different tab now so that I can show you how I'll go about it, right? So we're looking at El Nino phenomenon and we're looking at environmental degradation, right? So the first thing that I'll do, assuming I'm not too sure about the major databases, I'll come to Google Scholar, right? So there are several platforms that I would recommend you use. Scopus, Web of Science are the best, but Google Scholar is the most widely used, so it combines quality as well as trash. But with Scopus and Web of Science, that's probably the most credible journals. That's where they are mostly indexed. So can you all see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
So now we are asking ourselves, right? We're saying El Nino phenomena, and I think we all know what that is, right? So it's probably something to do with climate change, right? Or let's say environment. And then we're looking at, I think we saw some activities there, right? There was agriculture. And then when it comes to resource exploration, maybe it could be issues to do with mining. Then maybe things to do with industrialization, right? So now, before I click enter here, there are certain issues you have to ask yourselves. You are probably trying to find out if this research has been done at country level, global level, or regional level. But of course, the premise of doing a literature survey is to look at global, and then we go regional, and then we go country. So I hope we're clear on that one. Then the second thing you have to ask yourself is, I didn't put this on the slide, so I'll just tell you what you can write is, make sure you create a table where you have a list with several columns. The first one can be authors. I'll try to be slow on this one. Authors. The second one can be the title of the article or the research. The third one can be objectives. The fourth one can be methods as a column. And then the fifth one can be variables. And then the sixth one can be results. And then the last one can be recommendations. This has always helped me. So then how do we go about this? So maybe we can add one more variable, right? Which is energy, right? Because they all have a bearing on the environment and vice versa. So after you've put in the words that can help you come up with a topic, because El Nino phenomena is quite broad, it's scientific, but there are some factors that speak to it. So when you've plugged in the keywords, you click enter. You'll be able to see that there's a lot of research that others have done, right? One is on the implication of energy expansion via interaction of coal, industrialization, and agriculture towards climate. And then there is energy of economic growth, industrialization. And then there's assessing environmental impacts of agriculture, and the list is endless. So you'll be able to notice that when you come here, it will show you next, 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 and you'll probably find thousands of articles on a related topic. So what I normally do is I look at probably the most cited or the most recent to speak to the topic at hand. But if you want to be more specific to say, has this been done, let's say in Zambia, then you can maybe put the country of interest. And then you click enter. It will still use the same algorithms. Fortunately, the first article that comes out is my own, right? The impact of agriculture and energy on CO2 emissions. But this is what I did to find out what others have done to come up with this topic. So assuming this topic wasn't done on Zambia, and then you press enter, the first thing that one does is when you open an article, so we're going to open one, and then we're going to use that as an illustration to what we can do across all articles. So there's several articles here that others have researched on. So one asks themselves, what do they do to come up with a methodology, a literature survey, and all. So maybe we can say, for argument's sake, let's look at maybe this one, or maybe let's say maybe you want to click on this one. But what I'm going to show you now, you should do this across all articles so that you can have a literature survey. So when you come here, you click on an article, you'll be able to see that a good number of these articles are available open access. So what you do is you download them. You can download it as PDF with cover, or just as PDF, as XML, or even as EPUB, which is a platform that works similar to Adobe, right? So if you come here, you download. I'll be able to open the first article, and I'll just show you what one would possibly do with one article. Then you can do this across all articles. So there you are on the manuscript that you've downloaded. So now sometimes you might find it difficult to read all the articles, but if there's an article of interest, you can read it up to the end. So what you do is when you come through an article like this one, the first thing that I would advise you to do is you read the literature. So the literature will have literally everything, the methodology, the objectives, and the findings, and it's easier for you to plug in on the literature table that you've created. So for example, here it says the mining industry plays a significant role in economic growth and development. Coal is a viable renewable energy resource with 185 billion deposits in tar, which has not been deeply explored, right? Although coal is an energy source and contributes to economic development, it puts pressure on environmental sustainability. That's already a problem, right? The current study investigates the single-angle coal mining impact on environmental sustainability and human needs and interest. So already that's the objective, you've picked it. The Fokker and Phillips environmental sustainability mathematics model are employed to measure environmental sustainability. That's already part of the methodology, right? The research findings demonstrated that single coal mining is potentially unsustainable for the environment. So that's already a finding, right? And if you scroll down on the abstract, you'll be able to find that there's even recommendations. However, if this is a methodology that you want to explore further, you scroll down into the methodology, you see how they came up with the methodology, the variables they used, and the analysis techniques. So you do this for several articles. Normally for students I supervise, I tell them to do this for 50 articles. And then afterwards we discuss, and then they tell me what they find as most appealing, and then they apply it in their work. So in terms of novelty, you can actually replicate what was done in Kenya and you do the same in Zambia. You can do the same in terms of what was done in Zambia 20 years ago, and then you do it now with recent data. So this normally helps in terms of a literature survey. So you find that from the table that you've created, you'll be able to have a methodology. You'll be able to also come up with a literature review for either your thesis or your article. So it's a backward approach, but it normally helps to already clear out the issue of literature as well as the issue of novelty. And then, of course, if you're dealing with empirical data, you can already analyze that. Even as you are writing the article, the thesis, you already have the results. That normally works, and it has proven to be effective for many researchers. So that's normally how you go about doing a literature survey and then going about it. And then you notice that from this analysis that I've applied, I did that for the two questions that I shared, and then I came up with these publications. One, you just saw it on the impact of agriculture and energy on CO2 emissions, and then on the one on debt, I came out with my colleagues on the paper on the impact of macroeconomic indicators and regime change on debt stress in Zambia. So that strategy normally helps you to figure out the gap at a global level, regional level, and country level. Because remember, a research that you do can be done at a global level, it can be done at a regional level, it can be done at a country level. So these techniques help much more than the traditional approach where you're writing literature review, literature review, literature review, and then you go to methodology at the very end. Why I always recommend these strategies, like for those who are quite quantitative in nature, you can actually do a normal analysis, do literature review, and then 2 weeks before the final submission, you do your analysis, and then the results don't make sense. So what that means is you have to disregard the results and repeat a whole semester or a whole year. So sometimes it's very helpful to start with the analysis, know the results, and then that's cleared off the hook. Because more often than not, many examiners, many reviewers will care more about your objectives, methodology, and findings much more so than the literature review. However, that is very important, but in terms of what you are adding to knowledge, that's what normally carries more weight. So this is just a strategy that has worked over a test of time. So I'm not saying you go argue with your supervisor to say I want to start with my methodology, but all I'm saying is that this has proven to be effective over time. So any questions so far? When I was sharing this slide, I heard someone say we should start with topic 1. I'm not sure who it is, but I think it's a lady. So why were you saying topic 1, and what have you, is there anything that you've captured from what you've just done, like in terms of you replicating it when you're doing your own literature survey? If you don't mind, feel free to comment. Anyone can comment.
Actually, sir,
Yes,
I'm
Jonas.
a guy. I'm a guy.
Oh, sorry about that. Yes, you can go
Yeah,
ahead,
but no
Jonas.
pressure. I have nothing to comment.
But is this something that you feel could help you in terms of coming up with a topic, or you prefer the
Yeah,
traditional way? And
I think this will be even time efficient because at least I'll be able to go through more articles or more findings of other authors.
yeah, so I think it could work actually. I've found it work for many of my research, and if you checked the other slide I showed you, I was able to show you some of the outputs that I ended up having as a result of doing a good literature survey. So sometimes I think in research it's not about how much time you use or how much work. I think it's about how efficient are you with the time that you are given. I think that's the most important space that we have. And I've seen, like, in many spaces you find that people believe that the longer I research, the more time it takes, the better the work. I'll give you an example. My PhD presentation was 1 hour. I did the presentation in 11 minutes, 20 minutes interrogation, 30 minutes they voted, and I was awarded the PhD. But you find that in other parts of the world, people think that if you present for 2 hours and the work is much better. I think the most important thing is to be concise and speak to the points that you are looking at. So maybe we can continue now. I think we still have a bit of time. So I would want to share a video about developing a conceptual framework now. But let me see how much time we have, and there's also another video that I want to share about the role of AI in research. But maybe before we go to these videos, let me talk a bit about inductive and deductive approach, and then we can share those videos and then we open it up for questions. So basically, in terms of research, there are two thoughts or schools of thoughts that normally come through one's mind. One is inductive approach, and then one is deductive approach. So these are just approaches that we have in terms of how do we go about addressing a problem, or how do you go about contributing to society in a specific space. So inductive reasoning, by definition, develops a theory based on specific observation. This is called the bottom-up approach. So here you observe something, and then you gather specific data, and then you have some pattern that you try to recognize, and then you come up with some theory based on that approach. However, I want to mention that it's not always that what we observe holds, and you need to have specific skills or strategies in order to find out that what you are thinking about holds. I'll give you an example. It's very much possible that in July, there's going to be a decline in ice cream sales, right? And it's also possible that there's going to be a decline in the cost of fuel. Maybe every July the cost of fuel goes high. So if you're going to use this approach, you might think that every time fuel goes low, ice cream sales also go low. But this is something that's not related, right? And this is also a thought that we always have, that correlation is not causality. So you just have to be careful in terms of patterns that you observe against a specific behavior. So it might have some problems, right? So the limitation that this inductive reason could have is it could be problematic conclusion, and it's also subject to falsification with new evidence, right? But it does really work. I did apply it for my master's thesis, and it did come out right. So it's very much possible to apply this reasoning. I remember I tried to test against FDI vis-a-vis the quality of life in Zambia, where I was assuming that if the FDI inflows are coming to Zambia, we expect a higher quality of life in terms of our HDI, GNI per capita, health index, and education index. But you find that even if FDI was going high, that wasn't related to our increment in our HDI level, because from the findings I did notice that FDI contribution to education and health is less than 2%, and it was impossible to make inferences. So that's a risk that can come out if you want to make conclusion that a specific pattern would always culminate into a specific output. The second approach, of course, is a deductive reasoning. Here we test an existing theory by starting with a general premise. This is what we call top-down approach. And then, of course, we have a theory which could start with a general statement. For example, all low-cost airlines have flight delays. This could be a theory, but you have to test this again at maybe 100 flights, and then how many minutes of delays, right? And that's why we try to test that against a hypothesis. So we gather data, and then we try to analyze. And then based on the findings, and then we can come to a conclusion whether this analysis or this theory or thought that we had is valid or not. Of course, the limitations are conclusions rely on accuracy of initial premises, and I think we all know the issues in terms of hypothesis testing, quantitative analysis. So for example, you have to always make sure that the coefficient are statistically significant. So all those deviations are very much key in terms of the approaches that you use and the advantages thereof. So, and then of course, when you look at inductive vis-a-vis deductive reasoning, in terms of a nutshell, this is a chart that was got from Scribble, a very good site where I actually also used to do my studies. So with inductive approach, the idea is you have a specific observation, and then you observe some patterns based on that observations, and then you come to a conclusion. So for example, where could a study work in terms of inductive approach? One could argue to say in developing countries, setting up a company takes very long, getting title deeds takes very long, and then you compare countries like USA, Canada, and then you compare against developing countries. If that comes out true, and then your strategy would work in terms of inductive approach. What about deductive approach? You perhaps have an existing theory, and then you formulate hypothesis, you collect data, and then based on the analysis you decide whether to reject the hypothesis or not. So what example could we have in terms of testing against deductive approach? One would argue to say an increment in investment contributes to GDP. So maybe you have a model, You have GDP, you have investment, and then you have supporting models, maybe institutions, and then maybe you've got agriculture, maybe you have services. And then depending on the outcome, if the coefficient is significant and then your conclusion is true, and then you reject the hypothesis of saying that investment might not. Yeah, so this is just something that you could apply in terms of the approaches that you go about doing your thesis or your article or your monogram. This is very important because sometimes others might be qualitative in nature and others might be quantitative in nature. So it's always good to have appreciation for both strategies to figure out which one you could apply when it comes to your work. So any questions before we share one or two videos and then wrap up? So let me open up for questions now. Anybody wants to comment or ask a question, feel free. Yes, Mercy.
Okay, for me, thank you, Doc. I just needed a clarification on Google Scholar. My experience with Google Scholar has been that most of the articles, they are not free. So I wanted to find out if there's an alternative or a way of going around that.
Okay, so I'm going to respond to that question, but let me take two more questions so that I can respond to them at once. Okay, so let me try to show you an alternative that you could try. So, but I'll just comment that Google Scholar is an indexing platform. So you find that all the journals, they subscribe to Google Scholar. So when you search using Google Scholar, you'll be able to see the links to the journals. Then you'll be able to notice that when you go to the journals, some of the journals would require you to pay some amount, right, in order for you to access those. So there are two types of journal publications. Some are open access, some are premium. So with an open access publication, you can download it and read it for free. Of course, for you to publish a journal open access, you probably need to pay as a publisher, as an author, but normally it's free for all and it enhances readability and you get more citation and credit for it. And then we have some journals where people have to pay to download. So I would have loved you to suggest one article you are not able to download so that I can show you the site that you can be able to check for that article. Do you have it off your head?
No.
Okay, so there is this site. Let's try to look for something on Google Scholar that is premium and see if we can download it on a different site, right? Yeah, I'm just showing you. So disclaimer, if you have copyright issues on this one, yeah, but it's a free site, right? So I'll just show you. Let's come to the page that I was on when sharing the articles, right? Because the one that we opened was free. So let's try to see if we can find an article that requires one to pay and how they'll go about it, right? So I'm here. Let me see if there's an article that requires payment, and then I'll show you how you can download it to respond to Messi's question. So if you want to, you can see that this article might probably require you to have some institutional access to download it, right? So there are two ways that you would go about it, right? Normally articles have what we call a DOI, which is the author ID, the link, or you can just come here on the title of the article. I don't know if you can see, I'm failing to copy it. So let me try to show you how others have done it. So you click copy. I hope you're able to follow through. So when you come to copy, there is this site called Sci-Hype. It normally downloads other people's articles and puts it on a repository. Of course, sometimes you'll be able to have a lot of pop-ups because it's a free site. So when you come to this site, Messi Sci-Hub, and then you paste the article that you want to download, and then you click open. Okay, this one I'll need to open it with the DOI. So let me look for the DOI, which is a better way to open it. So let me just come here. If you cannot open it by clicking the title, you click the link here for the article. It's called DOI. You copy it there. You come to Sci-Hub. Just a moment. And then you paste it there, Control V, and then you click open. Okay, so maybe they haven't loaded it yet because sometimes they take a while, but let's try another one maybe. So maybe we try, okay, this one is open access. Let's try maybe this one. Yeah, so let's try if this one can be accessed, right? This is September 2019. So you come to the DOI, you click Control C, which is copy, and then you come back to Sci-Hub, to the search engine, and then you paste it there, and then you try to open it. You'll be able to see that the article will come through, and then you just download it on this site, and then you'll be able to read it. So of course, you know, like others might have issues in terms of copyright, but this is basically the way many of us have been able to access those articles, because normally an article will cost an average $20 to download it, and the book will cost about $100 if it's premium. So that's one way that you could use in order to access that article. I hope I helped in responding to your query, Messi, and I'll be able to share this site if you will need to. Yes, Jeff, your hand is up.
Thank you very much, Doc. So mine is on the inductive reasoning, where one observes and then comes up with and I mean collect data in order for them to formulate a theory. So I was thinking about maybe if one is having some preconceptions as well as biases, how then can then counter that when they're using an inductive approach.
Okay, so it basically depends on the because remember that inductive approach speaks about observing patterns. I think maybe one approach you could use, you could perhaps use meta-analysis, where you could plug in a lot of literature on a subject matter, and then it summarizes and gives you a conclusion based on the combined findings. Then another one that you can do is when you have some biases is, of course, you can plug in a questionnaire. It could be a Likert scale, it could be a thematic analysis, and then based on the responses, that would guide your decision. The only problem is, like what you've said, is if you've got maybe your argument is that people that, let's say maybe you're looking at a class, and then your argument is that maybe people that don't access the internet have got a negative, it has a bearing on their performance, and then you interview 90 people without internet and then 5 people with internet, and then of course there'll be a bias in that space. And then depending on your analysis, you can always cluster your responses in a certain way that it still analyzes, even if you have the majority coming from a different category. So that's one way you could use to ensure that your responses do not come out into a bias. Similar to the way we do it in statistics, where if you are analyzing categorical data with dummies, you don't do a normal logit, but you do a tobit based on the majority of people who have maybe values of 1 as compared to zeros. So in a similar way, when it comes to inductive approach, you could cluster your data in that way. Of course, maybe in subsequent lectures, or maybe as we meet, we can engage more on that, but basically you have to ensure that you cluster it in a specific way. You have to cluster it also in such a way that the responses guides your decisions, and you have to be careful to avoid the trap of cherry picking. Yeah. So maybe now let me try to share a quick video on AI and research. It's a bit of a longer video, it's 15 minutes, and then we'll get 2 comments, and then we wrap up for today. So let me just reshare it, because when I shared at first I discovered that I didn't share sound. So just give me a second and I'll play it.
So, anyone who's been paying attention for the last few months has been seeing headlines like this, especially in education. The thesis has been students are going to be using ChatGPT and other forms of AI to cheat, do their assignments, they're not going to learn, and it's going to completely undermine education as we know it. Now, what I'm going to argue today is not only are there ways to mitigate all of that. If we put the right guardrails, we do the right things, we can mitigate it. But I think we're at the cusp of using AI for probably the biggest positive transformation that education has ever seen. And the way we're going to do that is by giving every student on the planet an artificially intelligent but amazing personal tutor, and we're going to give every teacher on the planet an amazing artificially intelligent teaching assistant. And just to appreciate how big of a deal it would be to give everyone a personal tutor, I show you this clip from Benjamin Bloom's 1984 Two Sigma study, or he called it the Two Sigma problem. The 2 sigma comes from 2 standard deviations, sigma the symbol for standard deviation, and he had good data that showed that, look, in a normal distribution, that's the one that you see in the traditional bell curve right in the middle, that's how the world kind of sorts itself out, that if you were to give personal one-to-one tutoring for students, that you can actually get a distribution that looks like that right.
Doc,
it says
there's no
tutorial
sound.
one-to-one with the asterisk, like that right distribution.
The video is playing, but there's no sound.
Okay, let me try to reshare it. Just a moment. Is it everyone wasn't getting sound? Because on my end it says there is. Hello?
Two standard deviation improvement. Just to put that in plain language, that could take your...
Hello?
Okay, the volume did come.
Okay, but I'll try to play it halfway because I think we might finish the webinar soon. Then we can discuss it at the end.
average student
and turn them into an exceptional student. It can take your below average student and turn them into
an above average student. Now, the reason why he framed it as a problem was he said, well, this is all good, but how do you actually scale group instruction this way? How do you actually give it to everyone in an economic way? What I'm about to show you is, I think, the first moves towards doing that. Obviously, we've been trying to approximate it in some way at Khan Academy for over a decade now, but I think we're at the cusp of accelerating it dramatically. I'm going to show you the early stages of what RAI, which we call Khanmigo, what it can now do, and maybe a little bit of where it is actually going. So this right over here is a traditional exercise that you or many of your children might have seen on Khan Academy. But what's new is that little bot thing at the right. And we'll start by seeing one of the very important safeguards, which is the conversation is recorded and viewable by your teacher. It's moderated actually by a second AI. And also, it does not tell you the answer. It is not a cheating tool. Notice, when the student says, tell me the answer, it says, I'm your tutor. What do you think is the next step for solving the problem? Now, if the student makes a mistake, and this will surprise people who think large language models are not good at mathematics, notice, not only does it notice the mistake, it asks the student to explain their reasoning, but it's actually doing what I would say not just even an average tutor would do, but an excellent tutor would do. It's able to divine what is probably the misconception in that student's mind, that they probably didn't use the distributive properly. Remember, we need to distribute the -2 to both the 9 and the 2m inside of the parentheses. This to me is a very, very, very big deal, and it's not just in math. This is a computer programming exercise on Khan Academy where the student needs to make the clouds part, and so we can see the student starts defining a variable, left x minus minus. It only made the left cloud part, but then they can ask Khanmigo, what's going on? Why is only the left cloud moving? And it understands the code. It knows all the context of what the student is doing, and it understands that those ellipses are there to draw clouds, which I think is kind of mind-blowing. And it says, to make the right cloud move as well, try adding a line of code inside the draw function that increments the right x variable by 1 pixel in each frame. Now, this one is maybe even more amazing because we have a lot of math teachers. We've all been trying to teach the world to code, but there aren't a lot of computing teachers out there. And what you just saw, even when I'm tutoring my kids when they're learning to code, I can't help them this well, this fast. This is really going to be a super tutor. And it's not just exercises, it understands what you're watching. It understands the context of your video. It can answer the age-old question, why do I need to learn this? And it asks Socratically, well, what do you care about? And let's say the student says, I want to be a professional athlete. And it says, well, learning about the size of cells, which is what this video is on, that could be really useful for understanding nutrition and how your body works, etc. It can answer questions. It can quiz you. It can connect it to other ideas. You can now ask as many questions of a video as you could ever dream of. So another big shortage out there, I remember the high school I went to, the student to guidance counselor ratio was about 200 or 300 to 1. In a lot of the country, it's worse than that. We can use Conmigo to give every student a guidance counselor, academic coach, career coach, life coach, which is exactly what you see right over here. And this is all, we launched this with the GPT-4 launch. We have a few thousand people on this. This isn't a fake demo. This is really it in action. And then there's things that I think it would have been even hard, it would have been a little science fiction to do with even a traditional tutor. There's a student, we run an online high school with Arizona State University called Khan World School, and we have a student who attends that online school based in India, her name is Sanvi, and she was doing a report on The Great Gatsby. And when she was reading The Great Gatsby, Jay Gatsby keeps looking at the green light off into the distance. And she's like, well, why does he do that? She did some web searches, and people have obviously studied this and commented about the symbolism of that, but none of it was really resonating with her. And then she realized that she had Conmigo and that she could talk to Jay Gatsby himself. And so, splendid choice, old sport. I am now Jay Gatsby, the enigmatic millionaire from F. Scott Fitzgerald's Classic. And so why do you keep staring at the green light? The green light, old sport. It's a symbol of my dreams and desires, you see. It's situated at the end of Daisy Buchanan's dock, across the bay from my mansion. I gaze at it longingly as it represents my yearning for the past and my hope to reunite with Daisy, the love of my life. And what was cool is Sanvi had said, I had this long conversation. She called him Mr. Gatsby. And at the end, she actually apologized for taking his time, which I thought was very polite of her. But you can imagine this unlocks learning literature, learning, you could talk to historical figures. We're even probably going to add an activity. You can talk to like the Mississippi River. It brings things to life in ways that that really were science fiction even 6 months or a year ago. Students can get into debates with the AI. And we've got, here's the students debating whether we should cancel student debt. The student is against canceling student debt. And we've gotten very clear feedback. We started running it at Khan World School in our lab school that we have, Khan Lab School. The students, the high school students especially, they're saying, this is amazing to be able to fine-tune my arguments without fearing judgment. It makes me that much more confident to kind of go into the classroom and really participate. And we all know that Socratic dialogue debate is a great way to learn, but frankly, it's not out there for most students, but now it can be accessible to hopefully everyone. A lot of the narrative, we saw that in the headlines, has been, it's going to do the writing for kids. Kids are not going to learn to write. But we are showing that there's ways that the AI doesn't write for you, it writes with you. So this is a little thing, and my 8-year-old is addicted to this, and he's not a kid that really liked writing before, but where, you could say, I want to write a horror story. And it says, ooh, a horror story, how spine-tingling and thrilling. Let's dive into the world of eerie shadows and chilling mysteries. And this is an activity where the student will write 2 sentences, and then the AI will write 2 sentences. And so they collaborate together on a story. The students write, Beatrice was a misunderstood ghost. She wanted to make friends, but kept scaring them by accident. And the AI says, poor Beatrice, a lonely spirit yearning for companionship. One day she stumbled upon an old abandoned mansion, et cetera, et cetera. I encourage y'all to, hopefully one day try this. This is surprisingly fun. Now, to even more directly hit this use case, and what I'm about to show you, everything I showed you so far is actually already part of Conmigo. What I'm about to show you, we haven't shown to anyone yet. This is a prototype. We hope to be able to launch it in the next few months. But this is to directly use AI, use generative AI, to not undermine English and language arts, but to actually enhance it in ways that we couldn't have even conceived of even a year ago. This is reading comprehension. The student's reading Steve Jobs' famous speech at Stanford. And then as they get to certain points, they can click on that little question, and the AI will then Socratically, almost like an oral exam, ask the student about things. And the AI can highlight parts of the passage. Why did the author use that word? What was their intent? Does it back up their argument? They can start to do stuff that, once again, we never had the capability to give everyone a tutor, everyone a writing coach to actually dig into reading at this level. And you could go on the other side of it. We have a whole workflows that helps them write, helps them be a writing coach, draw an outline. But once a student actually constructs a draft, and this is where they're constructing a draft, they can ask for feedback, once again, as you would expect from a good writing coach. In this case, the student will say, let's say, does my evidence support my claim? And then the AI not only is able to give feedback, but it's able to highlight certain parts of the passage and says, on this passage, this doesn't quite support your claim, but once again, Socratically says, can you tell us why? So it's pulling the student, it's making them a better writer, giving them far more feedback than they've ever been able to actually get before. And we think this is going to dramatically accelerate writing, not hurt it. Now, everything I've talked about so far is for the student, but we think this could be equally as powerful for the teacher to drive more personalized education and frankly save time and energy for themselves and for their students. So this is an American history exercise on Khan Academy. It's a question about the Spanish-American War. And at first it's in student mode, and if you say, tell me the answer, it's not going to tell the answer, it's going to go into tutoring mode. But that little toggle, which teachers have access to, they can turn student mode off, and then it goes into teacher mode. And what this does is, it turns into, you could view it as a teacher's guide on steroids. Not only can it explain the answer, it can explain how you might want to teach it. It can help prepare the teacher for that material. It can help them create lesson plans, as you could see doing right there. It'll
Dr. Pierre.
We can't hear you, Dr. Piri. We can now. We can hear you now.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Piri.
Thank you, Doc.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Doc.
Doc. Yeah.
Thank you.